My name is Eleanor Price. I'm 68 years old, and I've lived in this house longer than I've lived anywhere on earth. I know every creak of its floorboards, every stubborn hinge that needs a nudge, every draft that slips through the kitchen window when the wind shifts east. But that night, at 2 in the morning, I heard a sound I had never heard before. A heavy, violent pounding shook the front door so hard the picture frames on the hallway wall rattled. For a few seconds, still half asleep in the old armchair I inherited from my husband, I couldn't understand what was happening. Then a familiar voice split through the cold December air. "Mom, open the door, please, just open the door." It was my daughter, Megan, my only child, the one I had once carried into this house asleep on my shoulder after long shifts at the sewing shop. I pushed myself up from the chair, heart thumping, and moved toward the front hallway. Before I reached the door, another voice cut in, sharper, angrier, a voice that had grown stranger to me with each passing month. "Eleanor, open it now." Through the narrow glass pane beside the door, I saw Tyler, my son-in-law, gripping a hammer from his truck like he meant to break the whole frame down if I didn't comply. His eyes were wild enough to make me step back. Megan stood behind him, shaking, clutching a stack of papers to her chest as if they were a lifeline. Inside the house, the warm kitchen light spilled into the hallway. Ruth Coleman, my oldest friend and a retired attorney, sat at my table with a thick folder in her lap. Daniel Kim, the young lawyer she trusted, leaned forward when he heard the pounding. Ruth's voice was steady, almost cold. "Don't open that door, Eleanor, not tonight." I closed my hand around the new set of keys that lay on the console table, the metal still warm from where I'd been holding them earlier. And in that moment, standing between the house I built with my husband and the child I once believed would never turn against me, I understood that nothing about tonight was a misunderstanding. Something had broken long before this door ever did. The year Frank and I decided to build this house, money was tight enough to make our stomachs knot every time a bill showed up in the mail. We lived in a one-bedroom rental above a laundromat where the machines thumped until midnight and the smell of detergent soaked into our clothes. Still, every Sunday after his bus route, Frank would drive us past a small patch of land at the edge of town, just a rectangle of dirt boxed in by 2 maples and an overgrown ditch. He'd pull over, rest his elbow on the steering wheel, and say it again like he always did. "Someday, Elle, someday, that'll be ours." I'd laugh and tell him he was dreaming too big for a man who ate canned soup 5 nights a week. But he never blinked at the hard parts of life. He just kept moving, kept believing, kept pushing us forward inch by inch, and by some miracle stitched together from overtime hours, extra sewing shifts, and a loan so small it barely covered the concrete slab. We finally bought that land. I'll never forget the first day we stepped onto it as owners. Frank carried 2 sandwiches in a paper bag, and I brought a thermos of coffee. We sat on overturned paint buckets and tried to imagine walls rising around us. He traced the floor plan with his boot, dragging a line through the dirt. "Kitchen here," he said, pointing to nothing. "Living room over there." He mimed an invisible TV. "And your sewing corner right by the window." I added a little square in the air where I hoped a crib might go someday. He kissed the top of my head and said, "Let's build a life worth putting a crib in." The work took years. Not glamorous, not quick, just 2 people stubborn enough to try. Frank hauled lumber on his days off and hammered nails until his shoulders ached. I painted trim with brushes that shed more hairs than they held together. Some nights we were too exhausted to talk, eating cheap pasta straight from the pot because we couldn't afford plates nice enough to bother dirtying. But every victory mattered. The first wall that didn't wobble, the first working light switch, the first winter where the heat stayed inside instead of escaping through the gaps. We bought the armchair from a thrift store for almost nothing, though Frank acted like he'd discovered fine furniture. He set it right beside the front window, sat down, and sighed deep like a man sinking into his future. "This chair," he said, "is going to have a whole history by the time we're done." And it did. When Megan was born 2 years later, tiny and furious at the world, Frank took the night feedings just for the excuse to sit with her in that armchair. He'd hum whatever old country song came to mind, rocking slowly while she gripped his shirt with her little fingers. I'd wake to find the lamp still glowing, Frank asleep upright, Megan curled against his chest like a kitten. Those were the years that made everything worth the struggle, the years where we finally felt like we'd built something real. But life has a way of slipping out from under you. The same hands that built this house started trembling when Frank tried to hold his morning coffee. He brushed it off at first, said the bus schedule had been wearing him down. But I heard the strain in his breathing when he climbed the front steps. The doctor visits came next, then the diagnoses. Then the pills lined up on the kitchen counter like a grim parade. Watching him shrink into that armchair, that same chair that once held so much hope, felt like someone was carving pieces out of me. He still smiled, still tried to reassure me, but the light behind his eyes dimmed each month. The day they told him he couldn't drive anymore was the day his world got smaller. He sat at the table with his hands folded, staring at nothing, and whispered, "If I can't take care of you two, what's the point?" I held his face in my palms and told him he had already taken care of us in ways he'd never understand. But sickness doesn't listen to comforting words. It keeps marching. By the time Megan was finishing high school, Frank could barely make it from the living room to the bedroom without stopping to rest. She tried to help, I won't pretend she didn't, but she was young, overwhelmed, aching to step into the world instead of watching her father fade. I didn't blame her for wanting distance from the sound of oxygen machines and soft groans in the night. I only wish she knew how much those final days carved themselves into the walls of this place. On one of his last lucid evenings, Frank sat with me on the couch while rain tapped steadily on the roof he'd once nailed together, plank by plank. He squeezed my hand, thin and cold now, and said, "Elle, promise me something. No matter what happens, keep the house. Don't let anyone push you out. This place is our whole story." I promised. I didn't think I'd ever need to defend that promise from the people we loved. When he passed, the quiet was unbearable. Every creak, every shadow, every soft hum of the heater reminded me of him. But the house held me together. It made me feel like he wasn't entirely gone. And maybe that's why it cut so deep, years later, when the first cracks in Megan's voice hinted that she no longer saw this house the way we did, that something in her life had shifted, something I should have paid attention to sooner. Megan eased back into my life the way a cold front rolls in, quiet at first, barely noticeable, then suddenly impossible to ignore. She would stop by after work, always just for a minute, dropping a load of laundry into my machine or grabbing leftovers from the fridge. I enjoyed those visits more than I admitted. Hearing her keys jingle in the lock, listening to her vent about customers at the furniture store, it made the house feel alive again. But there was something else hanging over her, something heavy she didn't want me to see. She laughed too quickly, avoided eye contact when I asked how her bills were, and brushed off questions with a breezy, "I'm fine, Mom, don't worry." I told myself she was just tired. I told myself she was still grieving her father in her own way. Then she brought Tyler home. He arrived with a confident handshake and a nice enough smile, dressed in pressed chinos and a button-down that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. He introduced himself as a paralegal at a small law firm in town, making sure to emphasize the legal part as if it were a badge. He spoke with a kind of rehearsed charm, the type that fills silence too smoothly. Still, he was polite. He complimented my cooking, offered to help fix a loose hinge on the pantry door, and called me Mrs. Price even after I told him he could use my first name. Megan lit up around him in a way I hadn't seen in years, and that alone softened me toward him. If he made her feel safe, then maybe he was good for her. They married quietly the next year. Nothing extravagant, just a courthouse ceremony and dinner at an Italian restaurant Megan had always liked. I helped pay for it, dipping into the tin box under my mattress where Frank and I used to stash emergency cash. It felt right at the time, like a small gift to nudge my daughter into her future. After the wedding, they moved into a cramped apartment near the freeway. Megan tried to make the space feel cheerful, hanging thrifted curtains and placing a potted plant in the window. But every time I visited, there was a tension humming beneath the surface, stacks of unopened mail, a leaky faucet no one had fixed, and the constant hum of traffic shaking the walls. Tyler blamed the rent hikes, the economy, the terrible state of the job market. Megan just looked tired. One evening, while she folded laundry at my kitchen table, she blurted, "We're thinking of staying here for a bit, just until we catch up." She said it quickly, like ripping off a bandage. Just a few months. Tyler's hours got cut again, and my store is slow. I nodded, even though my stomach tightened. I knew what just a few months could turn into, but she looked so worn down. And the thought of her struggling while I had an entire house to myself felt wrong. I told her they could stay. They moved in 2 weeks later with boxes stacked to the ceiling of their car. At first, it wasn't terrible. Tyler mowed the lawn without being asked. Megan helped reorganize the pantry. We ate dinner together, laughed over old family stories, and for a while it felt like I'd been given a second chance at having a full house. But small shifts began to show. Tyler started commenting on the house more than necessary, tapping walls with his knuckles, running numbers through his head aloud. You could sell this place for a good amount. You know, move into a nice senior community with an elevator and a gym. This house is a lot for someone your age. I forced a smile and said I wasn't planning to move. He dropped it then, but he kept circling back, always with a tone of concern disguised as helpful advice. Megan began echoing him, gently at first. "Mom, you don't have to keep taking care of a whole house. Wouldn't it be easier to downsize?" She said it while rinsing dishes, her back turned, like she didn't want to see my reaction. I told her the house wasn't a burden. It was home, but the conversations kept coming, the suggestions slipping into every dinner, every morning coffee. Tyler started asking about my finances, subtly at first, then with a push. "Who manages your accounts? Do you have automatic payments set up? You ever considered letting someone help? It just takes one mix-up at your age to get behind." At my age, the words scraped something sharp inside me. I caught Megan watching me the way people watch a candle flicker, as though waiting for it to burn out. It hurt more than I let on. Then came the first moment I should have paid attention to. I misplaced my checkbook one afternoon, an honest mistake, shoved behind a drawer, and before I could even tell her I'd found it. Megan whispered to Tyler in the hall. "She forgets things now. I think it's getting worse." I stood frozen behind the doorway, the words tightening around my ribs. It wasn't just worry in her voice. It was something else, something calculating. That night, I sat in Frank's armchair long after they went to bed, staring at the shadows stretching across the living room. I told myself she didn't mean it. I told myself she was stressed, scared, overwhelmed. But beneath all my excuses, a quiet truth settled in. Something was changing in my daughter, and whatever it wasn't drifting in a good direction. The shift from concern to control happened so slowly I almost missed it. Tyler began correcting me in small ways. little comments meant to sound helpful but edged with something sharper. If I forgot where I set my glasses, he would lift his eyebrows and murmur, "See what I mean?" If I paused a moment too long trying to remember a date, he would exchange a look with Megan that made my stomach twist. I wasn't losing my memory. I was losing my place in my own home. The day I overheard them was the day the ground finally tilted. I had dozed off in Frank's armchair, wrapped in an old quilt, when their voices drifted from the kitchen. It wasn't arguing, it was worse. It was low, hushed, intentional. "She's slipping," Tyler said. "You saw her mix up the medication bottles." "That was one time," Megan whispered. "She corrected it right away." Tyler's tone hardened. "If we don't act now, we'll lose the chance. Guardianship takes time. Paperwork, doctors' evaluations, hearings. We need to get ahead of it." Guardianship. The word hit me like ice water. I held my breath and leaned forward just enough to see their silhouettes through the crack of the doorway. Megan rubbed her temples. "I don't want to force her into anything. It's for her own good," Tyler replied. "And ours. We're drowning. Meg, your mom is sitting on the only asset that could give us stability. Once the court grants guardianship, we sell the house, pay off debts, and finally get ourselves set up." There it was, naked and foul. Megan didn't speak right away. When she finally did, her voice was so small I almost didn't hear it. "What if she hates me? She won't even understand what's happening," Tyler said. "People her age get confused. She'll adjust. This is the smartest move." My hands shook. I realized I had been holding the edge of the armchair so tightly, my knuckles turned white. I waited until they moved down the hall, then slipped quietly into their room while they were in the shower. The top drawer of Megan's dresser was always slightly crooked, sticking out just a hair. And that night it betrayed her. Inside was a folder thick with papers. I opened it with trembling fingers. Petition for guardianship, medical assessment, financial oversight request. Lines already filled out in Tyler's handwriting, notes scribbled in the margins, a list of dates, a phone number circled twice with the name Dr. Harris beside it, and an amount, only $500. I sat on the edge of their bed and felt the air grow heavy. Then I snapped photos of every page with my phone, one by one, careful not to bend or stain anything. When I finished, I slid the folder back exactly where I found it. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of cold tea and stared at the shadows creeping across the tile floor. Frank's words echoed in my head. "Keep the house. L. Don't let anyone push you out." Morning came gray and too soon. I waited for Megan and Tyler to leave for work before calling the only person I knew would know what to do. Ruth answered on the second ring, her voice soft but alert. She listened without interrupting as I told her everything. When I finished, there was a long silence. "Eleanor," she finally said, "they're setting up a legal case to take control of your life. This is serious. You need protection." She came over that afternoon with her old briefcase and sat at my kitchen table like she had 100 times when Frank was alive. Her presence alone steadied me. She explained what guardianship really meant, how they could move me, sell the house, manage every dollar I had. Then she helped me list what needed to happen next. We would get an independent cognitive evaluation from a neurologist she trusted. We would document everything, and we would prepare for a fight I never imagined having with my own child. That evening, before Ruth left, she rested her hand on mine. "You're not losing your mind. You're losing your boundaries, and we're going to get them back." After she walked out the door, I stood in the quiet house and felt something shift inside me. Not fear, not grief, resolve. Everything Megan and Tyler thought they were building behind my back had just started to crumble, and they didn't even know it yet. The morning of the hearing came cold and sharp, the kind of Ohio winter air that stings before you even step outside. I barely slept the night before. I kept replaying the pounding on my door, Megan's desperate voice, Tyler's grip on that hammer. Part of me still hoped Megan would back out at the last minute, would walk away from the plan that could have erased my entire life. But hope is fragile, and that morning it felt paper thin. Ruth picked me up early, her briefcase resting on the back seat. Daniel waited for us at the courthouse, straightening his tie as we approached. He gave me a reassuring smile. "We have what we need," he said quietly. "Just breathe. Let the truth do the work." We walked into the courtroom together. Megan and Tyler were already there, sitting side by side at a small table near the front. Megan kept her eyes down. Tyler didn't bother hiding the confidence in his smirk. Their attorney stood behind them, flipping through a stack of documents I recognized all too well. When the hearing began, their attorney painted a picture of a woman slipping into confusion, a woman who needed supervision and protection. He spoke calmly, almost sympathetically, describing incidents pulled out of context and exaggerated until even I could barely recognize myself in them. Tyler nodded along, arms crossed like he'd practiced the posture in a mirror. Daniel rose when it was our turn. He didn't start with accusations. Instead, he handed the judge a sealed envelope containing the cognitive evaluation from Dr. Patel. He let the weight of that document fill the silence before speaking. "Ms. Price is fully competent," he said. "Medically, legally, cognitively." Then he played the recording, hearing their voices echo through the courtroom, their plan to take guardianship, sell the house, use the money to fix their own lives, sent a chill through me. Megan's soft question, the one that had haunted me for weeks, came through clearly. What if she hates me? And Tyler's cold reply followed like a jagged blade. She won't even understand what's happening. I watched Megan flinch as if struck. Tyler's face drained of color. Their attorney fumbled for words that wouldn't come. The judge leaned back, eyes sharp. "This is not concern," she said. "This is exploitation." She rejected the petition for guardianship on the spot. Then she delivered words I never expected to hear. "Given the evidence, this case will be referred to the county prosecutor for review of potential elder abuse and fraud." The gavel struck like thunder. Tyler exploded first, cursing under his breath as he shoved his papers into a bag. Megan sat motionless, staring at her hands. For a moment, I thought she might look up, meet my eyes, give me something, an apology, a plea, anything. But she didn't. They left without a word. Weeks passed, then months. Tyler's job unraveled under the investigation, and Megan lost hers shortly after. I heard through a neighbor that they'd moved into a cramped apartment across town, trying to stay afloat. I didn't reach out. I couldn't. The wound was too fresh. Life settled into something quiet after that. I spent my mornings sewing by the window, the same spot Frank once imagined for me when the house was nothing but dirt. Ruth visited often, bringing muffins and news from town. I found a rhythm again, steady and predictable. Then one evening in early spring, a soft knock came at my door. Not pounding, not shouting, just a knock. When I opened it, Megan stood there with Emily, her little girl, whose eyes were wide and hopeful. Megan's voice trembled as she spoke. "We're not here about the house. Mom, I know I broke something in us. I don't want Emily to grow up without you." For a long moment, I didn't speak. I looked at Emily clutching a stuffed rabbit. I looked at the woman who used to chase fireflies in our backyard, who once curled up on Frank's chest in the old armchair. "Come in," I finally said. "We'll start with tea." They stepped inside, and though nothing was fully healed, something small and warm flickered to life again, tentative, fragile, but real. The house felt whole for the first time in a long while.